Hey everyone, and welcome to Wrestling with Memories. I am your host Fash, the $1 Million Fan, and I'm joined today by a very well-kept, wax the brain, a little bit insane Hussein. You finally found a razor, and you're looking more, less mullet man of the 1980s and more like, well-groomed. It looks like you found an Elizabeth in your life, maybe.
I don't know what you're talking about, Fash. I thought I looked amazing. I was going for the wrestling hairstyle,
I
slightly
think you were
long.
going for the hobo look, and you played
Well,
it pretty
some
well. But
some have said that as well.
welcome to 2021. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, but talking about 2021, let's go back almost 30 years, Fash, to 1992, back to our timeline. We are at WrestleMania VIII, one of the iconic WrestleManias of our time, certainly. When we look back at events and timelines, this is really peak,
My phone's
peak
going
wrestling.
Keep talking, Wax.
I don't know what's going on. This is so unprofessional from Fash.
It's all the ladies. They just can't stay away. Carry on.
Indeed, it must be that pink shirt that you're wearing.
Well, it's actually orange. I think if anyone's wearing pink, mate, it's you.
I'm calling this maroon, but
salmon.
Yep. So we've built up to WrestleMania 8 for several weeks now. Go back, look at our archives. We looked at Ric Flair, Macho Man build up in detail. We looked at the Sid Justice and Hulk Hogan match in detail, the world title picture. We looked at all the other storylines coming into it. So we're not going to talk about that specifically. Let's just jump straight into the event.
Well, Wax, for this WrestleMania was the first one that we watched live. So it's quite a special one for me because when I go back, it's my first kind of full memories. I remember getting the tape of this back in 1992 from a family friend. And then what I realized was that it was recorded in long play. My video was short play, and this is going to mean nothing to our new listeners. But for those that are of our vintage, they'll remember that there used to be an issue between long play and short play. And I put it in my VCR and it was just going at 100 miles an hour. So then I went to my cousin's house, who wasn't a wrestling fan. I remember going there about 8, 9. This is so vivid. And I stayed there till about midnight, which, as a little kid, wasn't supposed to do, but they let me watch the event and then they dropped me back off. And then I remember getting it subsequently from you. So I remember watching it some days later again over some hot samosas. And if you don't know what a samosa is, please Google it. It's a great food, one of the best. So this one is really vivid in my mind in terms of being the first big event that we were really excited about and the one that we watched live. And we've talked about Survivor Series, Royal Rumble, but this is the one that actually sticks with me more than those.
Yeah, and the setting couldn't have been more amazing as well. It was the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis. It looked tremendous. It's a proper stadium show. Yeah. And I think that just added to the whole setting. I don't remember watching it live because I don't think I was allowed to stay up that late. But I certainly remember having to record it on VHS. And there was always this funny thing with VHS recording back in the day. There was so many little shenanigans that you have to do to make sure you recorded it properly.
Was it even live at that time? I don't even know if the shows were live or they were at a delay anyway. That's probably something to look back on, but I'm not sure. But I do remember that you would have seen it around about the same time or before me, given you had Sky at the time. But yeah, as you say, there was so many quirks, and I'm sure as other people will be thinking about the memories they had in terms of recording of events and missing a bit or not having a tape which was 3 hours, all the other problems that people don't have now.
Indeed. So why don't we just kick off into the event itself, Fash? Match 1, straight with it, we've got El Matador Tito Santana versus the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels' very first WrestleMania match as a singles competitor. What did you think, Fash?
Well, this one's interesting. I know you love El Matador Tito Santana, but he actually has one of the worst, if not the worst, WrestleMania records. So do you know that his record is 1-7? When it comes to main WrestleMania events. So he won at WrestleMania 1, and after that he had 6 shockers. And basically, I'm saying 6, he had 7 shockers. Terrible record. And he did win a dark match the year after this, but that doesn't count. So, you knew what was happening here. There was one new star, there was one established star. And even, into this match, what I found interesting was, and I didn't remember at the time, they announced that Shawn had challenged the winner of the Intercontinental title match, so therefore straight away you knew what the outcome was going to be. I thought it was a fair match, some good back and forth, but one of the things that I've got in my mind for this event and I noticed was some of the finishes are so abrupt, and that's what I remember about this one. And watching it again, it was there, but there was some good stuff happening. I mean, Tito does his flying kind of
Yeah, flying
elbow
elbow.
thing.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, Bobby Heenan calls it the flying jalapeno, which you
yeah.
certainly couldn't call it in 2021. There's some other shenanigans. Shawn Michaels does the super kick, but it's not his main finisher at the time. You know, kicks on the side of the head. The teardrop suplex is his finisher, and he tries that. He's not successful. And there's some back and forth, but it's really the ending, which I thought was a bit weird. What did you think of that?
And actually, this era was actually full of these type of finishes, and maybe it's in a way to protect certain talent
Yeah.
by not getting that decisive win. But yeah, Shawn Michaels, I think Tito goes for a slam. Shawn Michaels holds onto the top rope, and it
Yeah,
eventually,
he's trying to bring him in from the apron.
yeah, and falls on top of Tito, gets the win, 1, 2, 3. And I actually thought this was a really decent match.
It was a good opener.
A good opener. You got two very good talents in terms of in the ring, so they started off on a very solid basis for me. I would say almost 3 stars for me, Fash.
Oh, if we're going down the star system, I would agree with that actually, because it was one of the better openers up to this point in WrestleMania history. I thought they worked well together. The ending, I said, you take it two ways. One is that it's very different, and it seemed real. The other was, it could have been a little bit more dramatic. And one thing I noticed though when I was thinking about the endings, and we'll talk about them and as we go along, Pat Patterson was suspended at this point, and it just came to me that he's the man who's the king of the finishes, and maybe that had something to do with some of the outcomes. But yeah, I think as an opener, the crowd, which we're going to talk about throughout this, the crowd was amazing at this event. I felt, and you say visually, the crowd's great. I mean, there's some empty seats, and they're quite visible at times, but I thought the crowd was right into it. I think both of them did well. Sean's still finding his feet as a single star here. I think the combination with Sherry is so underrated, and going back and watching that is really cool now. But yeah, overall, I think it was a good way to start the show.
Definitely. And then that moves us into a promo, which we have kind of rare to see a sort of live promo done on a pay-per-view. You don't see that anymore. But it's the Road Warriors with a special guest with Mean Gene. It's basically the return of Paul Ellering, who, when I first seen him, we hadn't watched all the wrestling history prior to that, so I had no clue who he was. But Paul Ellering's actually got a very rich history with the Road Warriors, dating back to the sort of early 80s. He was a wrestler himself, but once upon a time back in the day, he got injured really sort of young into his career, so he ended up being a full-time manager. But he added a different vibe to the Road Warriors. I'm not necessarily sure he was actually that required. I mean, I thought Hawk and Animal were fine doing their promos as they normally do, so sort of shouting down the microphone. So, Fash, I don't know if he added much.
I didn't think it was a weird one, because what I find funny about this is Mean Gene says something like, "Here they are." Doesn't even announce who it is. The music plays, the crowd goes crazy. But the key thing here is, Wax, we hadn't seen them, the Legion of Doom, since Royal Rumble. So we've discussed in our archive episode how they lost the titles in kind of shady fashion. We didn't ever get to see on TV that they lost the title to Money Inc. because they were having issues with the WWF at the time. So this is kind of their return. We don't know much about it, but I remember watching this live, this one as well. The music plays and you go crazy, and the crowd was into it. But yeah, I think similar to you, I don't think most of the crowd knew who he was. So this kind of awkward thing. So they're alluding to it, and you hear some people cheering, but it was really small in terms of volume, and the majority didn't have a clue. And similar to what you say, I don't think it was required. And as we know what Vince is going to saddle them with in the coming weeks, I mean, it's really kind of humiliating to what Paul Ellering is going to introduce a puppet, as we know, in the coming weeks. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, it just felt a little bit out of place. But I think it was just to show everyone, look, LOD are back. They're the main guys, and they're going to come after the titles. But yeah, it was, as you say, odd for the time to have a segment like this.
Moving on to one of the marquee matches of the event. It's one that we've talked a lot about in the build-up as well. It's Jake the Snake Roberts versus The Undertaker. Pretty, a great combination. I would say they worked together on the same side for several months prior to, Saturday night's main event, which we talked about. And suddenly you've got the Undertaker turn happening. And I think Undertaker had a great reaction from the crowd when he came out and throughout the match. He was a proper babyface by this point. Yeah,
so these are our two MVPs of 1981 colliding. And we've discussed how, the pivots took place and this feud came about. So we've got a specific episode on that in our build-up to WrestleMania 8. And obviously there's a backstory here as well. And we won't go into it too deeply because we can do that in a future episode, because I guess we'll be talking about the shake-up from this event. But this is Jake the Snake Roberts' last match. At the time, we didn't know this, obviously. But, behind the scenes, he wasn't too happy. He thought he was getting a booking job with Pat Patterson being away. Vince decided not to go ahead with that. So essentially, Jake Roberts quit. But before he left, there's some back and forth, and he was going to do the job to the Undertaker. For me, the problem with the Undertaker matches at this point was that they were just punch, kick, slow motion, and Jake does a bit of that. So I thought the environment and the excitement was great. The story was great, and the crowd loved everything the Undertaker was doing. But in terms of it was a very basic squash, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, he really did put over the Undertaker. He really sold well for him. The only slight bit, obviously, he took 2 tombstones. The Undertaker took 2 DDTs from Jake and managed to get up from both of them. And again, that's just him selling the fact that he's...
But that was awesome. But that was what made it. The crowd went crazy for that because they were expecting something different. So when he DDTs the first time, there's this anticipation. Undertaker rises, but then he hits him again, and then the crowd doesn't really know. And then obviously he went outside.
The DDT is a phenomenal move at this point. It's very over. The crowd knows once it's hit. That's likely to be the end of the match.
Well, it's the only move, isn't it, that people cheered for?
Yeah, indeed. And something interesting that I read about or listened to on one of the other podcasts was that the eventual ending of this match actually happens when Undertaker gives Jake a tombstone on the outside of the ring.
Yeah.
Now, per the planning, it was actually supposed to be inside the ring, and he was supposed to get the 1, 2, 3. But apparently, Jake called an audible, maybe to protect himself a little bit here, getting a tombstone right on the outside of the mats, and that's what led to the 1, 2, 3 for the Undertaker. So Jake maybe. Carry on. Jake, as the sort of seasoned veteran at that point, could have called that move, and and Undertaker would have followed because he was still very young in his career.
Well, now, at the time, obviously, we didn't know what was going on, but and I think at the time we generally thought he'd tombstone him into the mat. But when you see it now, it's a very safe tombstone. And to your point, obviously, we didn't know that Jake was leaving, and he'd end up in WCW very shortly after this. So obviously, as you say, he's protecting his character because he knows that he's got to make money elsewhere. Jake's run comes to an end here. We'll talk about it a bit more, but it is a bit of a the end of this amazing purple patch, and I don't think that he got back to this. I mean, in WCW he's there for a very short period of time. It's a continuation of this, and I quite enjoyed it watching it years later. But we're not going to see Jake now until Royal Rumble 1996 in a WWF ring. But you were a big fan at the time, and I think we believed that the Undertaker had just got rid of him, and that was a kind of storyline on TV. But I know you were disappointed, and I remember the years after this you would always say to me, oh, Jake Roberts going to come back. And I'd also remember vividly, I think you used to get that German channel DSF or something, and you called me one time and you're like, Jake Roberts was on French wrestling, so obviously you got the language completely wrong. Right? But what we learned later on was that while he was in AAA and he had a feud with Conan, I think that's what you were watching at the time, and you were saying, oh, Jake Roberts is around actually, and we'd missed the WCW thing at this point, so we didn't know that. But it's a bit of a sad because ending here, because Jake was having such an amazing run in terms of character development.
Definitely, I think it was an epic run. I mean, as you say, Undertaker and maybe Macho Man probably matched him over that period, but I think Jake was incredible, and I think he really deserved something better. Beyond just
but it was a good way to pass on, wasn't it? Because if you think about it, Undertaker's defeated Jimmy Snuka the year before, who's a phenom, and now he's taking on the guy who's the darkest, and he's defeated him. So it really just carried that legacy of the Undertaker. The only thing I think that was missing was a snake, because I know Jack Tinney had banned them, but can you imagine if Cobra or something would appear and Undertaker would have just no sold it? I think that would have taken it to even the next level. But that's creativity and creative plans a good 30 years after the fact. But it was a good filler match. It did the right thing by Undertaker's definitely a babyface now. He squashes the old villain and moves ahead. And as we'd learned, this was a shake-up of the roster.
It was. And then we move on to another iconic match, one that has actually always remained with me, in all the WrestleManias that I've watched. It's Roddy Piper, who's the Intercontinental Champion, against Bret the Hitman Hart. We talked a little bit about the build-up, but I mean, they're friendly, but they're very competitive sort of thing. That's the whole angle of this match. And, I think we talked about Bret's coming out party being SummerSlam the year before against Mr. Perfect when he won the IC title. But if you think about it, this was his really first big win, against somebody who really meant something in Roddy Piper.
I'd agree with that. So I think this was the true kind of next step.
And the way they ended the match as well was sort of to solidify that. And it's only only a couple of months after when we thought Bret was actually going to leave the WWF, which is... for Vince, very surprising that he forgave him so quickly and moved
Yeah.
on with the title.
Well, as you see, there's so much kind of back and forth in this story about was he going to WCW or not, and mixed accounts. But as you see, it appears that when he came back, he was told that you would win the title from Roddy Piper. I mean, in terms of the match, it is brilliant, isn't it? It's probably Roddy Piper's best ever WWE match, if you think about it, because he's had lots of brawls and other things. But in terms of an actual wrestling match, I don't think he ever did better here
No.
or after. He really put over Bret. I mean, there's the blade job, which Bret wrote about in his book later on, saying that everybody thought it was a legit blood and injury, but he did it in a smart way. But yeah, I mean, the back and forth, technical wrestling, the story behind it, because they kept playing that is Hot Rod going to turn here, and the ending, which maybe you can talk to, this back and forth, is when Piper's got the bell in his hand, and it's like he's going to hit Bret, and then he's looking around at the crowd. So some great
Yeah.
emotives here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I said this, I remember very vividly this whole match. Bret pretending his shoulders hurt, and he goes for a small package. Roddy holds the ropes open to let Bret back in. He allows Bret to come in, and Bret's tying his laces, and then Roddy goes for the sucker punch. I thought it was tremendous because, as again, it just goes to the fact, they're friends, but they're very competitive, and they both want to win the title. The blood really added to the match. There was a ref bump, and then, as you say, Piper, we think he's going to nail Bret Hart with the ring bell. He decides not to, and Bret really gets the tights. And
well, this was brilliant. I mean, well, let's talk about this, because to me, we talk moments of this event and just genuine moments that stay with me. It's this reversal. So I think doing it justice is something that I've never forgotten. And it's like Piper's got him in the sleeper hold because he doesn't hit him with the bell. Then, as you say, but then Bret kicks his legs on the turnbuckle as the reversal. I remember watching that same thing, how awesome that is, and even now when you watch it, it's brilliant. So it's probably, we're talking about the finishes, this was certainly a Bret Hart idea, because I feel the rest of the card is different, and it was just brilliant at the time to watch, and even now it's great to watch. So just that was one of the moments that certainly stayed with me.
It reminds you a lot of the Bret Owen finish as well, a couple of years later, which has a similar vein to it, which we talked about.
And then also he did something similar when he took on Stone Cold Steve Austin at Survivor Series 1996. So they played off that a little bit. So it's just iconic ending. And then, of course, to show that Roddy isn't a bad guy, they embrace, and that's really a passing of the torch moment there.
Yep. Talking about another passing of the torch moment.
Well, just before you move on, Wax, let's just say one thing here. We didn't realize this, but that was it for Rowdy, really. So he's going to show up playing the bagpipes at SummerSlam, but he doesn't actually get back in the ring until King of the Ring 1994 in a terrible match. So this was actually him giving up the belt and going away. But obviously there was a lot of chat about Hogan and him heading off, but it was very quietly done. So he, like I said, appears at SummerSlam, but that's him now for a couple of years. So, there was no kind of fanfare around that.
Yeah. And it was a nice touch that he managed to win a title before he left. And there was a lot of, but he was back and forth with WWF, WCW.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. This was the kind of full time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But I think one thing we've not mentioned we should have was, before this match, the interview segment with Mean Gene Okerlund is hilarious. When they talk about the friendship and the dungeon, and Roddy Piper takes some digs at Bret's family.
I noted down, Roddy's just having fun, right? And Bret's just trying to be super serious.
Yeah.
And again, it's you don't see this very often, like a promo right before the match that they're having.
Yeah.
So I think all their work together over the run up was really good.
And bits that we couldn't remember or recall, like the matches they had with others and the back and forth. So I thought this was great. You didn't give a rating to the last match, so you can do that and give one to this one as well.
The Jake Roberts Undertaker match, I'm going to go for 2 stars for the match itself. The drama actually probably deserved maybe 3 stars. And for this match, I went 4 stars.
I think I'd probably go 3.5 here, a bit harsher than you. The previous one, I think it's more about what became the legacy. So I think I'll back you with the 2 stars in that one.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the next promo that we get on screen, and that's of Lex Luger, who's actually not legally allowed to be part of the World Wrestling Federation programming, but he's in the guise of being involved with the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation that Vince is running. And he's acting like a heel, right? He's acting like a proper heel that, we would maybe come to see a year on from here. And he looks huge. When he's sitting there, he is absolutely... he fits right into the WBF mode and maybe the WWF maybe the period, maybe not immediately now because of all the steroid stuff that was going
Yeah.
on, but a few months ago he would have fit right in.
Yeah.
But this was the first time we got to see Lex Luger.
Yeah, and I remember watching this at the time, but not recalling it because it was just this kind of fleeting appearance. And but as you say, that my observation was that he was huge, and the fact is when he comes to the WWEF in 1993 at the Royal Rumble, he is looking much smaller. And
Yeah.
as you follow that journey, he gets even smaller. So you can see, with the steroids and stuff here, you could see a big difference in him because here he was just ridiculously big.
Yeah,
But I thought it was funny, his digs at Gorilla Monsoon, Bobby Heenan sucking up to him, and that's going to then flip into when he comes to be a wrestler. But it was just interesting seeing this. They're still pushing WBF, but yeah, a smart way to have Lex Luger on the show without, breaching the terms of WCW.
Yep. Let's move on to our fourth match of the event. This is a match that gets a lot of talent. I say talent in the word very loosely on the card. We've got Nasty Boys, the Mountie, and Repo Man up against the Big Boss Man, Hulk Hogan. You can't promote the Hulk stuff. Sergeant Slaughter, Virgil. And who am I missing?
Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Jim Duggan. So clearly I'm equating Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Hulk Hogan in my notes here. The only interesting thing and entertaining thing about this match is actually the very opening. The announcer, who is Ray Combs, host of Family Fortunes, he does a very hilarious segment where he's introducing the heels, which I popped for. But otherwise, I think I've fast-forwarded the match, Fash.
Absolute dud. I mean, the best part of the match was when it ended. This was just getting these guys on the card, wasn't it? And Virgil's got an amazing WrestleMania record. I could be wrong, but he's $200 million man the year before. But leading into this, I think they were actually going to have Hacksaw and Slaughter take on Money Incorporated, because if you remember that Saturday night's main event we keep talking about, they take on the Beverly Brothers there, but thankfully they decide not to give them a title shot. But yeah, this was just a bunch of guys. I mean, Bossman and Mountie are not feuding anymore. He was kind of feuding with the IRS, and then that got dropped. Nasty Boys and Hacksaw Slaughter, not much happening. Repo Man and Virgin, no one cares. So just a kind of match that was there. Absolute dud. Let's move on.
And we're moving on to the best match of the show. It is the world title match, or first half of the double main event. It's Ric Flair, the world champion, against Macho Man Randy Savage. For me, this is a 5-star match, not just for the in-ring action, but the drama that resolved around the ending and whatever happened, in the build-up. For me, this whole angle is a 5-star. We talked about it in our last episode, so I'll let you kick off, Fash.
I thought it was the match of the night for sure, and probably one of the best. You could even argue the best WWF title match up to this point in WrestleMania history. Both of them worked together really well. Crowd again was molten for this. As you say, the story was great. The work between them both was great. It was hilarious with Mr. Perfect just interfering over and over and over again. And then the emotion with Elizabeth coming out at the end. So yeah, I thought it was a really good match. I mean, it had the high stakes. The crowd obviously bought into the storyline, and Ric Flair gets his big WrestleMania moment. The Macho Man gets his big moment being the champion again. So yeah, I thought it was really good. You watch it now, it's still entertaining. Maybe a little bit too much interference from Mr. Perfect, but then it plays into the finish, which you can certainly talk to.
Yeah.
Here, Ric Flair also bladed himself, so I'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, if you want to maybe, what were your thoughts?
Well, let me ask you a question, Fash. Has Ric Flair ever been in a world title match where he's not bladed? I reckon there's probably very few occasions where that's happened. He loved getting the juice. I'm surprised he still has blood in his veins today. It was a great match because it's just started on fire. Macho Man coming out, as we know, he goes straight after Ric Flair. And something about Macho Man, he's very agile for a guy who's approaching his probably late 30s. His leaps out of the ring, when he's in the ring, he leaps over the top rope and lands on his feet, are tremendous for a guy who's not really a high flyer. And I always remember when he does that, he goes straight after Flair. Mr. Perfect gets involved. We get the blood, as you mentioned, from Flair. And towards the end, we've got Mr. Perfect getting involved timeless times. One time he gives Flair those, they're not brass knuckles, they're knuckles of some variety. Flair uses them, but Macho Man kicks out. And at that point, I I started to believe maybe the Macho Man could get a win here.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is, as you say, it was non-stop action. So looking back at this, I thought there'd be some recipes, but see, they played off the reality of the storyline, and it's just non-stop, like wearing each other out. And as you say, it looks like it's coming to an end. I mean, throughout this match, Ric Flair's working on Macho Man's knees, and that's going to play into the finish. But as it looks like, Ric's going to come out on top here with all the cheating. Elizabeth runs down, and I'm sure you would have popped for that.
I sure did.
And then we're going towards the ending of this match. So, Ric Flair's going to put the figure 4 on and, lock it in. But Macho Man's able to get out of it. There's lots of officials out there trying to stop Elizabeth for some reason. I don't know why they wouldn't stop Mr. Perfect, but they're stopping Elizabeth maybe for a safety.
Well, I was going to say that it's not a great look, is it? 4 or 5 guys hassling this lovely lady on the outside of the ring, and she's just telling them to go away. And part of that group, and I never noticed it until I rewatched it the other day, is Shane McMahon.
Shane McMahon is here, yeah. Shane O'Mac.
Looking very young and dapper, but I'd obviously never put that together before watching it. I thought it was really hilarious.
Yeah, he's even a referee, isn't he? I think at WrestleMania 6 or something, which at the time you don't notice at all. But yeah, he's one of them. So all these guys hassling. I would have loved it if Macho Man just came and wiped out all those guys for talking to his wife. But yeah, I mean, Perfect is basically interfering while the figure 4 leg lock is on. Elizabeth's outside, so the emotion is at its highest then. But once again, the ending of this was abrupt again, I felt, in terms of, it wasn't the most innovative finish in terms of memorable. You remember the match, but maybe not how it ended.
It was in effect another roll-up here, wasn't it, Fash? And again, I mentioned this before, we see a lot of these in this era because I think the whole idea is to protect your talent by not losing cleanly. And they wanted this angle to go miles and miles beyond what it did.
Yeah, at this point they did, but it was just even, it's the way that the roll-up I thought was a great thing. He pulls his tights and gets the 3 count, but it was, I think, he's got his leg and it's just a punch from the Macho Man and then he rolls him up. So it wasn't like, something leading up to the roll-up, so it's quite good. And actually, it was poetic in the sense that Mr. Perfect's been cheating throughout this. Yeah. Ric Flair's been cheating, and then the Macho Man actually cheats in the end, gets the victory. So, he just deserts for those two.
Yeah, and we're not quite done. As Macho Man is sort of recovering on the floor, Liz comes in and Flair grabs her and starts ranting at her. And, he's bloody and he just goes in and gets a kiss off Liz, who then slaps him, which he...
And Macho Man goes nuts.
Macho Man at that point goes nuts. But for somehow, Flair manages to get the better of Macho Man, even though there's all these officials in, gets a few kicks in.
The officials just came out to see Elizabeth, didn't they? They're useless. But and then you see Elizabeth, celebrating with him, and Ric Flair can't believe it. So, and the crowd's going crazy. So this was a great moment, a great match, and certainly, up to this point in this event, the best match on the card. It was better than Piper and Bret. So a great moment. I say the crowd looks great here because of the stadium, the atmosphere. So a great ending to it. And as you say, it continues the feud theoretically because it wasn't a clean victory. So both can talk about it. But leading up to this, Wax, Ric Flair had promised a big centerfold of Elizabeth, and even before this match, he's talking about it, and then they just ignore that whole thing. So the bottom line is he was lying, and they kind of just drop it there, don't they?
I don't know if he was lying. I've seen that picture, Fash.
I don't know if you've seen it. You've seen it in your dreams, mate.
Maybe. The angle sort of continues at post-match. There's promos from both sides. And I thought the promos by Heenan, Perfect, and Flair were tremendous. Talking about how Macho Man has got his day in the sun, but the Flair will be back, on top very soon. Mr. Perfect is brilliant. He's so annoyed. He's so pissed off with what's happened, and Heenan as well. Throughout the rest of the show, you'll complain about what happened.
And it was great because Ric Flair talks very normally. So it's just like to show the gravity of the situation, how annoyed he is. He's speaking normally, which added to it, with everyone else ranting and raving around him. And then, I see the Macho Man promo is really intense as well.